Thank you very much for joining us today. This webinar is focused on our new funding call, Integrating Sleep and Circadian Science into our Understanding and Treatment of Anxiety, Depression and Psychosis. Thank you for all the questions that have been submitted in advance, and we're going to look to answer those as we go through this webinar. So just quickly, this is the outline of the webinar. We'll kick off with some introductions. We'll then have an overview of the Wellcome Mental Health Strategy, and that will lead into some of the background and the preparation of a sleep and circadian rhythms and mental health report. And then we'll finish off with information on the funding call and answer the questions that were submitted. Hand over to Catherine for introductions.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm a graduate trainee in the Mental Health Translation team, and I've been supporting on the development of this call. I'll hand over to Kim.
Hi, I'm Kim Donahue. I'm a Senior Research Manager in the Mental Health Translation team here at Wellcome.
Hi, I'm Kate Martin. I'm the Head of Lived Experience in Wellcome's Mental Health team.
Hello, I'm Nick Mayer. I'm a psychiatrist specialising in sleep medicine, and I'm working with the Wellcome Trust in developing the core.
Veronica?
Over to Veronica.
Hello, my name is Veronica Wanya, Lived Experience Advisor based in Nairobi, Kenya.
Thank you. And I'm Lindsay Bills, and I'm Head of the Mental Health Translation team. Chris?
And I'm Chris Christopher, Programme Manager within the Mental Health Translation team.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So on to the mental health strategy. So Wellcome supports science to solve the urgent health challenges that affect everyone. So within that, in mental health, we are looking to ensure that no one is held back by mental health problems. And in particular, we're focusing on anxiety, depression and psychosis. In infectious disease, we are looking at controlling escalating and emerging infectious disease. And these are in the communities that are affected the most. And then in climate and health, we're looking at preventing climate change from harming the health of the communities that are affected the most. And then we also fund discovery research into health, life and well-being. And it was recently announced that we have 16 billion to spend over the next 10 years in providing funding, in building global partnerships, and in supporting advocacy in an attempt to change the thinking around these key challenges. So in mental health, our mission is to drive a step change in early intervention for anxiety, depression and psychosis. And we're aiming to do this by building a more integrated field of mental health science that combines different expertise, and that's including lived experience. We're looking to fund a broad range of research to understand how biological, psychological and social mechanisms are involved in the development and the resolution of anxiety, depression and psychosis. And then we're also looking to develop and improve interventions for the treatment of anxiety, depression, and psychosis. And these may be pharmacological or non-pharmacological, and for use in both healthcare and non-healthcare settings. Now, today's call is on our sleep and circadian rhythms funding call, but we also have a number of other opportunities available. So we have two contract opportunities. The first is called History of Causes, where we're looking for a supplier to do a review and provide a summary of the most influential, clinically relevant biological, psychological and social mechanisms that are proposed to explain mental health problems over both the 20th and the 21st centuries. Our second contract opportunity is ethical considerations for a mental health data resource. So here we're looking for a supplier to identify potential ethical issues of mental health data collection and also strategies to mitigate against these. And then in November this year, we are looking to launch another funding call. This one will be around the development and the validation of biological, psychological and social and digital markers that will help improve stratification in anxiety, depression and psychosis. So the remit of the mental health team is that we can fund global research focusing on anxiety, depression and psychosis. Now these are broadly defined and there'll be more on that later. We recognise the importance of funding research across a number of levels, so from the subcellular through to the social, and also seeking input from a wide range of disciplines that are relevant to mental health. So this may include psychiatry, psychology, economics, history, for example. And we can fund both basic and clinical research, and we encourage the involvement of a number of different methodologies, but we're particularly keen to involve lived experience in all the work that we do. We also require that for research, focusing on anxiety and depression, we ask that our applicants use the currently agreed core measures in their research, unless you can reasonably demonstrate why this isn't needed. Now, although the mental health team focuses on anxiety, depression, and psychosis, it's definitely worth noting that for any mental health research, you can also apply to our discovery research team, and they have a number of schemes that operate on a rolling basis. So I think they have 3 calls a year, and they can provide funding across a number of different career stages. So it's definitely worth checking out our website to see more information on that. I'm going to hand over to Kate now to talk about the role of lived experience.
Great. So Veronica and I are going to talk to you a bit more about the kind of role of lived experience in Wellcome's mental health programme. So lived experience is central to the work that we do, and there's kind of 3 broad areas of work around that lived experience, which we'll just talk you through briefly. So firstly, we work alongside lived experience experts to really inform the day-to-day thinking, planning, direction and decision-making of the mental health team. So one way we do that is we have a team of lived experience advisors and consultants from multiple countries and contexts, so spanning UK, South Africa, Kenya, Rwanda, Indonesia, India and Australia, who work within our team to really make sure that our work is informed by lived experience experts.
We also expect the projects that we fund and develop will involve people's lived experience in meaningful ways, although we also recognize that this is an evolving practice and there's a lot of learning to be shared on that journey.
And the third thing that we do in our team is really try and think through what ways can we or how can Wellcome best support the development of lived experience involvement within the wider field of mental health science, looking at more sort of strategic or systemic programmes to really make sure that lived experience expertise it becomes central to the mental health science community and the research that happens.
Next, we have one of the lived experience advisors, Margaret, who's going to explain a bit more about what lived experience is and the ways that it can enrich your research project.
So lived experience is a unique form of knowledge, insights, and expertise that comes from having experience of mental health challenges. So people with lived experience or lived experience experts are people who identify as having anxiety, depression, or even psychosis, either have experienced it in the past or currently. And people do not need to have a formal diagnosis or even accessed clinical services to be termed as people with lived experience. We believe that embedding lived experience expertise in mental health science can help broaden research and science opportunities that are currently not captured in the system. Lived experience also instills a level of trust in research, which is required for science to be effective and successful in the real-world settings. These perspectives from lived experience experts are equally valuable as those of experts. And we believe that lived experience involvement is a collaborative effort. It should contribute a vital perspective, and also it shouldn't invalidate other people's work or perspectives in the field. Wellcome asked research teams to involve young people in their research during the Wellcome's Active Ingredients Commission last year, which funded research to explore the evidence on interventions that could make a difference for youth anxiety and depression, such as those of physical activity, emotional regulation, and loneliness reduction. When we asked for their feedback on this, many teams told us that involvement of lived experience experts enriched their project, added more depth and breadth to it, and also made their research projects more useful and of higher quality. One research team in particular told us, and I quote, "It was something that I was slightly skeptical about before I started, but the involvement of young people really enriched the project. We get stuck in our ways, and doing something outside the box helps shine new light on a subject." And another team also fed back to us that the active involvement helped us define the scope of our review, shape our findings in ways which are more meaningful and appropriate and also relevant to young people, and to know how best these findings can be disseminated to other young people.
So earlier this year, Nick, who's with us here today, who's a consultant in psychiatry and sleep medicine at UCLH and a clinical academic at King's College London, together with Professor Matt Jones, from a professor of neuroscience from the University of Bristol, joined our team as embedded experts, and they began scoping the evidence that supports the disruption of sleep and circadian rhythms in mental health, and focusing in particular on anxiety, depression, and psychosis. I'll hand over to Nick.
Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, so I'll just say a few words about the report. So the main ambition was to try and develop a comprehensive snapshot as possible of the current landscape in the gaps, bottlenecks and opportunities for further research in the field. So as part of this, we performed a literature review and also held structured interviews with experts working in the field from around the world, and they generously contributed their time in the making of the report. So the report's structured into thinking about the associations between sleep and circadian rhythms and mental disorder, possible mechanisms involved, our current knowledge of treatments, and emerging areas, including sleep health, sleep in low and middle income countries, and sleep in different social and economic contexts. And the report is available to download from the website, and a summary of the key findings are available on page 30. So overall, we found that although there's been great progress in the understanding of the basic science of sleep and circadian processes, the translation of this knowledge into improved understanding and treatment of mental disorders is still in its early stages. So there's significant scope to better understand the bidirectional mechanisms between sleep and circadian disruption and symptoms of mental disorder. You can see some of the other conclusions we've drawn here. I'm just going to focus on a few of those and highlight a few. The field has tended to focus specifically on either sleep or circadian parameters in isolation, and there are relatively few studies that look at those together. Now, of course, sleep and circadian systems are closely intertwined and interconnected. So we felt a key role for looking at those concurrently and progressing the field through encouraging studies that look at both in the same populations. We wanted to place particular emphasis on the dynamic interactions between behaviors during wakefulness as well as sleep. So looking at sleep and wakefulness as two sides of the same coin. And possibly that question can be examined using emerging technologies such as digital phenotyping, consumer wearable technologies that allow longitudinal measurement of those variables in the real world. We also think it's time to certainly encourage the design and testing of new treatments that target sleep and circadian processes, because those treatments and interventions are currently lacking.
Thanks, Nick. So building on this report, we wanted to provide funding to address some of the gaps and opportunities identified by this report. And so in July, we launched this one-off funding call called Mental Health Award, integrating sleep and circadian science into our understanding and treatment of anxiety, depression, and psychosis. Now, the aim of this call is to advance our understanding of the roles played by sleep and circadian rhythm disturbance in the development and resolution of anxiety, depression, and psychosis, with a view ultimately to enabling effective early detection and intervention. Now, we worked closely with our lived experience advisors in the development of this call. Here you can see two quotes from Grace Katera and Benny Pravira highlighting the importance of sleep research from a lived experience perspective. So Grace speaking about how it's imperative that we find out more about how sleep contributes to better mental health outcomes for our communities. And Benny speaking about how he hopes that we will not only reveal the mechanism of sleep and circadian rhythm in mental illness, we will also have more accessible interventions. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Lindsay to give a little bit about the remit of this call.
Thanks, Catherine. So what are we looking to achieve in this call? So we want to build a greater understanding of the dynamic changes that occur in both sleep and circadian rhythms across trajectories and phases of anxiety, depression, and psychosis. And here we want to look at different developmental contexts, geographical, societal, and cultural contexts too. And we ask that applications must advance knowledge in relation to at least one of the following. So the biological and or psychological mechanisms that are through which sleep and circadian disruption influence and are influenced by anxiety, depression, psychosis. Identification and or validation of sleep and circadian markers that enable early stratification of people with anxiety, depression, psychosis. And then the third option is the development of novel or improved early interventions targeting sleep and or circadian processes. And this is for intervention in anxiety, depression, and psychosis. So then about the call. And here I'm going to try and answer as many questions that were submitted in advance as I can. There will be a separate slide, and Kate and Veronica will talk to the questions more specifically focused on lived experience, and that will occur in a couple of slides' time. So the focus of this call is on early intervention and anxiety, depression, and or psychosis. And we take anxiety, depression, and psychosis as broadly defined categories. So this includes all anxiety and depressive disorders. So that includes obsessive compulsive disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, and also all forms of psychotic disorder. So including schizophrenia, postpartum psychosis, and bipolar disorder. So we can fund academics or companies for up to £3 million for up to a duration of 5 years. And there isn't a kind of recommended amount that you should apply for. We ask you to just apply for what you need to carry out your project and to be realistic. We can provide funding globally. I think the only restriction that we have that relates to the host organisation, the lead applicant and co-applicants, is that Wellcome is unable to provide funding into mainland China and into sanctioned territories. We ask if your application involves research in more than one country, that you should have a co-applicant in each country in which the research will take place. And it's worth noting that we're really keen to encourage applications from and our partnerships with low and middle income countries, as this was one of the gaps that was identified in our report. So then in terms of career stage, we ask that the lead applicant has the necessary expertise to drive and lead a research programme that you're proposing. And we'll look for evidence to support this in the application form. We will accept applications from individuals, but we consider the remit of this call to be more suited to teams. And we're keen to encourage applications from multidisciplinary teams. Our grant system will only allow one applicant to be named as the lead, but this shouldn't actually affect the reality of how a proposal is actually managed jointly at an organisational level. And you can convey the dual nature of the partnership and demonstrate how the work will be done jointly in your application. You can be the lead applicant on one application and a co-applicant on another, but these should be for distinct research projects and they shouldn't have overlapping work packages. You also need to be able to demonstrate that you can dedicate enough time and resource to both projects if they're successful. And then there's also limits to the total number of Wellcome awards you can hold at one time, and this varies depending on your career stage. So please do look at our website for more information on this. There's no limit to the number of applications that can come in from a single organisation, providing that each applicant has a different lead applicant on it, and also that you take into account the restrictions I mentioned above in terms of number of applications and location of co-applicants. We also had a question that came in around pilot data, and here we ask you to include sufficient evidence in your application that really supports its feasibility and its potential for impact. So I'm going to hand over to Nick to do the next slide.
Thanks, Lindsay. So I just want to talk a little bit about this early intervention. So we've specified clearly that we'd like groups to focus on early intervention, but the interpretation of that can be broad. So it can involve individuals prior to their first episode of illness, during the first 5 years of their mental health disorder, or people in the chronic phase where identification and early intervention of relapse might be an area of investigation. But the underlying theme, it should speak to sort of preempt and predict paradigm to mental health disorders. We'd also like to see proposals that are driven by a clear hypothesis that includes, I mentioned, putative underlying mechanisms, or if those aren't known, seek to address and investigate such a mechanism. As mentioned a few slides ago, we'd also like to see research that integrates both sleep and circadian measures. Again, the interpretation of what sleep and circadian is relatively broad. Ideally, circadian measures involve measures of the endogenous biological rhythm. But if not, certainly we'd be interested in seeing other measures of circadian rhythmicity, including behavioral rhythmicity, if those are carefully justified. Also, we're interested in seeing a broad range of methodologies from polysomnography, high-density EEG, through to actigraphy and digital phenotyping using, for example, smartphones or consumer wearable devices. Again, we'd like to see clear justification of the methodology and that it's suited to the question that's being asked. And ideally, we'd want to see clear evaluation, performance evaluation of the technology for the question it's seeking to answer. As mentioned before, in terms of measures of psychopathology, we have on the website validated core measures, which we'd like applicants to adhere to. And underscoring all of this is a clear need. We'd like to mandate lived experience involvement throughout the process, from designing and undertaking of the study. There are a few areas that are out of scope, and again, these are available. Further details are on the website. We won't consider studies with no lived experience involvement, and nor will we accept applications where implementation science, epidemiology, solely human volunteers or animal models are the primary focus. Nonetheless, those are we'd be very happy and pleased to see those as work packages alongside other areas that are aligned with the main core.
Thanks, Nick. So to support our broader common measures approach, we plan to define a standardised set of core measures for sleep and circadian science. And the initial steps in relation to this will occur in parallel with the funding call. And then following the final funding decisions, we will request the successful applicants, or the successful award holders, I should say, to input into this process. And we'll ask them to attend a workshop and then to implement the recommendations as part of their research. And if needed, Wellcome will work with award holders to make any necessary amendments to both the budget and the project plans. And then in addition to using the recommended measures, applicants can supplement the measures with other data collection tools as appropriate. And at this stage, when writing your application, we simply ask you to include and justify your preferred measures in the application form. And we will, as I said, work with successful award holders at a later date around the standardised set. We're also looking to encourage harmonisation across studies, and we will be supporting data sharing, pooling and analysis across the portfolio. And we're looking to convene successful award holders again ahead of the award start date in order to explore potential opportunities for collaboration and harmonisation in order to maximise linkages and impact. So now we're just going to hear from another couple of our lived experience advisors.
I think there are many ways that you can involve and collaborate with people with lived experience. That might look like having expert advisors or involving people with lived experience as co-researchers and co-applicants, or even having an advisory group. At Wellcome, I think we're really open to any methods and roles that teams might choose, but we do expect lived experience experts to be involved in meaningful and appropriate ways in multiple stages of the project. So from delivery to design to dissemination. It's really important that as you involve people with lived experience, you don't make it tokenistic or make it a tick box exercise, that people with lived experience are involved in ways that are appropriate for the research aims and the different stages of the study. I think the first thing is to make sure that lived experience is central and guides multiple aspects of the project. So whether that's from designing the research or when you're collecting and analyzing data, or when you're sharing and disseminating your findings, making sure that that's guided by the insights you get from lived experience. But it's also really important for you to recognize people with lived experience as colleagues. They bring real expertise to the table, and so they deserve to have the same respect as you would give any other member of your project team. And in that same line, then you should pay your lived experience advisors and compensate them appropriately for the value and the experience they're bringing to the table. But as much as they're bringing a lot of expertise, lived experience advisors are still individual people with individual experiences, and so they cannot on their own fully represent the different intersections of community and context. And so it's really important for you to have diversity within your team, and especially within your lived experience advisors. And I think also it's important for you to be flexible when you involve people with lived experience, to have conversations on how you want to collaborate with them, and with the rest of your colleagues, to discuss what some of your shared values are and what some of the ground rules will be.
There are several points I have in mind. The first one is don't treat people with lived experience as research participants, because those two are different things. You should involve people with lived experience as experts, and try to involve them to inform you about your research process, the delivery, the governance, and the design of your research. And you could do that by involving them to be co-applicants or co-researcher, collaborators through advisory groups, or just gathering their perspectives through workshop or online discussions. And the second point I want to make is don't ask for their personal stories or their mental illness background. I mean, they could share that, but only if they feel comfortable to. And it's not necessary for them to do that, because that's not why they're there. They're there to provide you with their expertise, and instead you could more ask about their opinion about various elements in your research. And the third point I want to make is about don't involve them in small or insignificant ways. And by that, I mean, for example, you only ask for their opinion after the major decisions about the project has been made, or you ask them at the very end of the process, so their ideas cannot be implemented anymore. So it becomes futile, and it's best to make sure that their opinions really matter and inform the decision making of your research process. And I think the last point I want to make is don't be too rigid on the involvement. Many individuals can contribute in many different ways. It really depends on their preferred way of working. You could involve them through workshop or through emails and etc. I think it's also important to remember that we're all, as a research community, still learning about this, because this is a very new thing, and we're still learning about how to best collaborate and involve people with lived experience in mental health science. And particularly at Wellcome, we're also on this journey, and we're very keen to learn from other organizations and research teams. And with the Wellcome lived experience teams, we will be running workshops with funded teams about lived experience involvement, to enable them to learn together and share their practices. And I just hope that by normalizing the involvement of lived experience in research, we're getting close to our goals to make mental health science to be more applicable and beneficial in real-world settings.
Okay, so we're just going to talk through some of the common questions we get asked about lived experience, and just say a bit more about some of these. So I'll pass over to Veronica for the first question.
One of the first questions we get asked often is, do all projects need to involve people with lived experience? And the answer is yes. We expect all projects to involve people with lived experience in meaningful ways and at multiple stages. We recognize that there might be very limited exceptions outside of this norm where that's not possible, and we expect a clear justification for the reasons of lack of involvement of people with lived experience within your proposal, and we will take that into consideration when reviewing the proposal. But just to emphasize that that's in rare cases outside of the norm.
Great, thanks. The second question we've been asked is whether people need ethical approval to involve lived experience advisors in their projects. I think it's really important, as we heard in the last video, to really sort of see lived experience advisors and experts as very distinct from research participants. So, of course, we will need to ensure that all ethical processes and approvals are covered for working with people as research participants. But lived experience advisors or experts, in whatever role they take, is normally outside of that. They are not there as research participants, they're there as any other expert is involved in projects. So ethical approval is not normally needed. However, we know that there are certain kind of local or contextual guidelines or organisational process that need to be followed. So please do check with your institution, but our experience on the whole is that ethical approval is not needed for working with lived experience experts in projects.
The other question that we get often is, should people with lived experience be paid for their involvement? At Wellcome, we recognize lived experience as a valid form of expertise on the same level as any other expertise that would be embedded in your research. And so when you take that into consideration, as well as the roles and responsibilities and technical expertise that people with lived experience are bringing to the table, then you can see that there's a real basis for them to be paid for their time and effort. So we expect to see that payment or plans for that payment or compensation, depending on what makes sense for your context, costed in your budget. And I'll pass over to Kim for the next slide.
Thank you. So I'm going to give you a bit more information about how you apply for this call. So the first thing to say is please do look at our website. There's a lot of information there on Wellcome's policies, as well as additional information and guidance about how you can actually involve people with lived experience in your research. When you're ready to actually complete your application form, this needs to be done using our online grant tracker system. Again, please do check out our website. There's lots of guidance on how to complete the application form. And just to note that the proposal itself could be no longer than 4,000 words in length. As this is a full application, it needs to be approved by your host organisation before submission. So please do make sure that you budget time for this, ready for the deadline on the 19th of October. Your application will be reviewed against 4 weighted criteria at the shortlisting and interview stage. So the first is looking at the research question, proposed methodology and the potential for impact. So that gives a 40% weighting. Then the suitability and expertise of the team has a 20% weighting. Lived experience involvement also has a 20% weighting. And finally, suitability of the research location, research environment and research culture, also with the 20% weighting. There's a lot more detailed information again on our scheme page, so please do look at that. So a few key dates for you. So the application deadline is Wednesday the 19th of October this year at 5 p.m. British Summer Time. The shortlisting will take place in December this year, and interviews which will take place online for those shortlisted candidates will be January, February 2023. And finally, the collaborative workshop that Lindsay mentioned earlier will take place April 23. You don't need to contact us before you write and submit your application form, but if you do have any questions about how to complete the application form, for example, you can contact our grant information advisors via our website, or if you have any additional questions about the call and your eligibility for the call, you can email us on the mentalhealth@wellcome.org email address. Just to note that we, to try and be as equitable as possible, we can't actually discuss specific application forms with you before submission. And finally, to say, please do follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. We do share information on those platforms as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. So that was our final slide. Thank you very much for listening, and thanks for your interest in the Sleep, Circadian Rhythms and Mental Health Funding Call. We look forward to reading your applications.